With the NHL Draft being 3 days away, let's dissect the Locked On NHL Mock Draft. I'll share some prospect evaluations and the big questions for Friday night.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Joey Erickson, former producer of 105 Through the Fan. Please be sure to subscribe. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making us a part of your day and making us your first listen. Happy Tuesday, Stars fans. The NHL Draft is just 3 days away. We will know the Dallas Stars selection on Friday evening as they hold the 29th pick in the first round. The NHL season has finally concluded after a 7-game series in the Stanley Cup final. I am recording this before Monday night, so I do not know who hoisted the Stanley Cup. Congratulations to either the Edmonton Oilers or the Florida Panthers. If the Edmonton Oilers won, by the way, the Dallas Stars have lost to 4 out of the last 5 Stanley Cup champions. Can you believe that? They are oh so close every single year. But we're here to talk about the NHL Draft. I want to share the Locked On NHL Network mock draft with you. I know I brought it up once or twice before, but let's really dive into it. I'll share some prospect evaluations from Locked On NHL Prospects. Heidi and Sebastian over there are fantastic, and I have 3 prospect evaluations for you on today's episode, and we'll just go over some of the bigger questions revolving around the 2024 NHL Draft. So plenty to get into on today's episode, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So I'll go ahead and share on the screen the 2024 NHL mock draft from the Locked On NHL Network hosts. And we had a lot of fun picking our players and seeing how it all went down and how the board shuffled around as the picks came in. This draft in general is pretty interesting. The top of the draft isn't necessarily the star power that it was a year ago in 2023 with Bedard and some others, but a lot of the experts believe this year's draft is a bit deeper. There's about a consensus of 14 to 18 picks that are really, really strong. And by really strong, I mean top 4 and top 6 caliber players. And we all know once you're picking outside the top 10, it can become somewhat of a crapshoot, but that doesn't make it any less interesting. And as you know, I went with Harrison Brunicke of the Kamloops Blazers for the 29th pick for the Dallas Stars, the defenseman out of Kamloops who had a really, really strong season, a pretty big and offensively minded right-handed defenseman. We'll see if the Stars really draft for need, but there were some pretty interesting prospects still available that I could have chosen, including Ryder Ritchie, who we'll talk about a bit later on today's episode as well. Macklin Celebrini went number 1, though, to Locked On Sharks. That is obvious. The center from Boston University, he completely dominated the college hockey world this past season, and he was fantastic and every bit as deserving of a number 1 pick. There have been some questions about how really good he will be, and you may get jaded by the fact that Connor Bedard was this just can't miss number 1 prospect. And don't get me wrong, Celebrini is also in that company, but some people may be asking, is he a Bedard or is he closer to, let's say, an Ekblad? And there are a couple experts, specifically with The Athletic, that believe Celebrini is a much higher rated prospect than maybe some are giving him credit for, or maybe not credit for, but what they're thinking just with Bedard being this next generational player. And people think Celebrini is going to be a star player in the National Hockey League in a couple of seasons. So we'll see how that all plays out. You move down to number 2, you have Demidov, and then you have Levshunov, and he's a really interesting player and is typically graded as the top defenseman in this year's class. There's about 5 or 6 defensemen that people really, really love in this draft, and Levshunov is one from Michigan State. There are sort of tiers when you look at this defensive class, and Levshunov is part of that top group along with Yakimachuk and Boehm. And then there's a pretty decent drop off in terms of the type of talent you're getting. Levshunov is a really, really big, heavy, physical defenseman, and a lot of mock drafts, not just in this one, believe he's actually going to go number 2 to the Chicago Blackhawks. I did want to do some comparing to some other mock drafts just to show you where we're coming from as a network, and also how a lot of the experts deem it's going to play out. At number 3, from Anaheim, I mentioned Levshunov. For another mock draft, they have Anton Salayev, with Anaheim, which is really interesting because Anton Salayev in this draft for the Locked On mock draft went at 13 to the Minnesota Wild. So maybe somebody missed out on a can't miss prospect. He's a defenseman from Russia. It says Anaheim is one of the most interesting decisions in this draft. If Chicago took someone other than Levshunov, I think they make the decision less stressful for Anaheim, who can take the highly talented defenseman who played in North America. He's also in the KHL. They say his profile type is like Pat Verbeek, So Stars fans certainly know him, but if they don't go with the Russian, they can start talking about alternatives like Sam Dickinson or Carter Yakimachuk. There really isn't a consensus top 10 in this draft, which I think will make it pretty fun as the night moves along. I want to skip to number 8 and Zev Boehm out of the University of Denver. He went to the Seattle Kraken. I love Zev Boehm as a prospect. I actually got to watch him in person a couple of times when he played the University of Minnesota Duluth. I was in attendance of that weekend series, and I hadn't heard of him before I went to that weekend series, and I'm watching the game transpire, and I'm like, holy cow, this guy is incredible. And I'll give you my comp for him. It's Quinn Hughes. I'm like, holy cow, this is Quinn Hughes I'm watching. It's just exactly him. Really, really fun guy to watch. He is a forward. He has the skill of like a top 6 forward that's playing defense. He dominated college hockey this past season, of course, won a national championship. I really encourage you to look up the NCHC Frozen Face-Off. Denver plays in the NCHC, the conference, which is the conference they play in. My alma mater, St. Cloud State, plays in that conference as well. They met in the conference championship this past season, and they went to overtime, and Boehm scores this incredible overtime goal. He's a really, really fun watch. Really like his game. I think he's going to be extremely good in the NHL in a couple of years. So wanted to share some of my love for Zev Boehm. He's from California as well. Went to the national development team, I believe, for a year or so, and then made his way to the University of Denver. So wanted to highlight him. Cole Iserman, the 10th pick to I believe that's Locked On Wings. Sorry, some of the fonts are really small in this one. New Jersey Devils, excuse me. In the Athletic mock draft, they have Tij Aginla going to New Jersey. So Aginla moves up to number 5. There are some players that have a lot of hype around them that have improved their draft stock. Tij Aginla is one of them. Caden Lindstrom is an interesting pick. So there are some players that could get picked a bit higher just with their draft stock has really gone up over the last few months. Yzerman was considered a top 5 pick by most about a year ago, but there has been a lot of cool off around him for a number of years. There are some questions about his, I guess, want or motor. The skill is certainly there, but some don't think it's the type of skill that's worthy of going in the top 10. So he's kind of dropped outside the top 10 for a lot of experts, but still a really talented left wing out of the U.S. national program. We get to around 25 to 32, and this is where the 3 prospects I want to get into here in a bit. And I also did some draft prospect evaluations a week ago on the channel. Charlie Elick goes at 25, the Brandon Wheat Kings defenseman. At 29, of course, Brunicke, and then at 32, Ryder Ritchie, who has some similarities to Jason Robertson. So those are there are the 3 picks, and 3 of the players I did some reviews on that I think Dallas may have a chance at. There are some other interesting names that could possibly side to Dallas, but it's probably not in their best interest that they really bank on that. I know Uri, who we talked to a couple weeks ago, mentioned Adam Jurčić out of the Czech Republic, or Czechia, excuse me, another right-handed defenseman who is starting to have his draft stock increase a bit. He goes at 16 here to Locked On Blues. It's a possibility that he maybe fall to the 20s, but not necessarily a good chance. I'm curious to see if Dallas is going to move back in this draft. Is there a player? I would love to ask who's the player that you're going to throw your pin across the room if they get selected at 28, right before Dallas? Is there a player, if they get chosen 1 or 2 picks ahead of you, are you throwing the pin and you're like, okay, it's time to look for other options and maybe grab some assets, right? Because they just have a 1st round pick, the 5th round into 7th round. I'm curious if there's just a prospect in their mind that can't miss. So yeah, that's where we stand heading into Friday night a bit, but wanted to share the Locked On NHL mock draft. And for the most part, it lines up with, most mock drafts. It can change here or there with some prospects, but I think it's going to be a really, really fun Friday night, and I'm curious to see who the Dallas Stars take at number 29. Speaking of that, the Locked On NHL Prospects did some little clips, short clips of some prospect evaluations, and I chose the 3 that I did a week ago: Brunicke, Elick, and Ritchie. Hear from these experts on these 3 players and why they could be a great fit with the Dallas Stars. We'll do that in just a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel allows me to keep the sports going. All I have to do is download the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, everyone, with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Major League Baseball is heating up. We're in the dog days of summer. PGA Tour. Don't forget about the majors, the British Open next month. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Enjoy Major League Baseball. You have games every single night. Make some money. Do some of those home run bet props and make some cash with FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So I want to shift into some of these prospect evaluations. I just wanted someone else to have some input on the matter, so to speak, because I gave you my opinions and my observations from 3 of these prospects, but none better than Locked On NHL Prospects to put out some clips for us on certain prospects that I want to share with you. And I really encourage you, if you're really into the draft or want a more in-depth look from the draft, not just a Stars perspective, so to speak, even though I'm trying to do an enhancing coverage of it. We're always kind of coming back to a Stars perspective. So check out Heidi and Sebastian over at Locked On NHL Prospects. They do a great job. And obviously, this is kind of their busy time of the year. This is where their channel gets a lot of notoriety for good reason. So we'll start with the 29th pick and my selection for the Dallas Stars, Harrison Brunicke. And I'll go ahead and let Heidi take it away with this selection at number 29.
Dallas Stars picking, and this is the most Dallas Stars selection I can think of. The Dallas Stars go for Harrison Brunicke here at 29th overall in our Locked On NHL mock draft. Harrison Brunicke is a big right-handed defenseman out of the Kamloops Blazers in the WHL. There was a bit of a scare at the Combine. People thought that, I don't know why this rumor started, but somehow it got out that apparently he got measured at 5'10" only. He's not 5'10", and Scott Wheeler righted that ship pretty quickly. He's 6'2.5", 197 pounds, I believe, something like that.
96.
96. Oh, so close.
You're so far off, my friend. I had to edit and correct that.
Absolutely. But yeah, just big, rangy, mobile. He plays big as well. I like the physical game. I like his ability to kind of get in your face. He's dropped the gloves a couple times this season as well. A really interesting kind of physical player, but what really impressed me and the reason I like him more than the kind of usual mold of big physical right-handed defenseman is the sneaky skill in his game. You can't tell if you look at the scoreboard. He only scored 21 points in 41 games this season with Kamloops. But if you watch his game in detail, this kid can deke. Like, he's got really great hands. And he's not afraid to use him. He'll beat a wave on the. He'll beat a forechecker at the blue line. Just kind of swim past him really easily, and he doesn't stop there. I like that he eats up ice after his deke. He doesn't stop when he sees ice in front of him. He grabs it, takes a shot, makes a pass. I like the dare in this game. I think that's going to be the separator for me with Brunicke regarding this type of defenseman. I'm often not a big fan of this type of defenseman, usually because they're effective at what they do, but they're kind of limited offensively. With Brunicke, I don't really see as much limitation offensively. I see some upside here. So I'm pretty interested in what Brunicke becomes. And again, he's the most Dallas Stars pick I can think of.
See, it's a really interesting take that Heidi had here, because you look at someone like Brunicke, who is not known to at least show a ton of skill this past season, but he does have a really, really nice offensive upside. And you contrast that with a player like Charlie Elick, who we'll get into in just a moment, where Elick is considered this big physical defenseman who has a really, really high upside in skill and sort of makes the dangerous play or makes the exciting play more often than not. But when you watch the two, I see Brunicke as someone that is more skilled up front. And as he mentioned, he just eats up ice, and he's not afraid to use his skill. Elick, on the other hand, I felt was a bit more conserved in the way he used his attack. When he had the puck on his stick, though, he could gallop, but he was a bit more conscious of his use jumping up into the rush, in my opinion. So we'll see how it takes place. And Elick isn't as fleet-footed, in my opinion, as Brunicke. So maybe that is why Elick is a bit more defensive conscious, because he can get beat when playing up against guys that obviously have some speed on the outside. So there is another take for you on Brunicke, and I would love to hear your thoughts as Stars fans listening to that and how you view the prospect. Let's move on to Elick now, who is the right-handed defenseman out of the WHL as well with the Brandon Wheat Kings.
Ottawa Senators selecting again with Boston's 25th pick in the draft, and the Locked On Senators podcast selected Charlie Elick, a big right-handed defenseman out of the Brandon Wheat Kings. So Ottawa really solidifies their defense core here with their selections in the mock draft. Their first selection of the draft was a 7th overall with their own pick. They went with Sam Dickinson. Now they're going right D in Charlie Elick, a player of a similar mold to Dickinson as well. big, physical, mobile, aggressive, in-your-face type of defenseman with a decent breakout skill as well. He's able to make passes out of his zone pretty well as well, right?
Certainly. There's a lot to like with Elick in terms of combining that defensive aggression and also being able to kind of fall back into a more composed defensive type of role. Like we saw him play in the WHL with a lot more chaos and aggression and stepping up, taking risks defensively, maybe not chasing hits necessarily, but being aggressive and smothering play into the boards. And then at the U18 World Championships, he was very much more of like a positionally sound defender. He was patrolling the slot mainly rather than going out and meeting players at the blue line. He was allowing them to come in and then smothering into the boards well into the defensive zone. And he played both roles very well, which shows to his adaptability on the ice. Offensively, the ceiling isn't the highest in the world, but he's a decent enough distributor and passer. He has a heavy shot. There's a lot to like in this player. And if you're going for a guy in the mold of like a Braden Schneider, who's been playing really good second pairing minutes for the New York Rangers in playoff environments, Charlie Elick is your guy in this range.
See, I think Sebastian really echoed some of my thoughts here on Elick, where he plays a more conservative type of game. He's not afraid to just play more of a shutdown role. And watching his tape, he is a player that finishes his checks. He is really physical. He defends really well on the walls. I'm sure his size certainly helps. He uses his size well. He may not be as fleet-footed as other players in this draft, but he defends well with his size and he uses it well, and he's not afraid to park it and shut it down. I thought that was one thing he was really, really strong at. His assignments at one-on-one, he stays with his guy, he ties up. There are some moments when it gets chaotic in terms of team defense where he can get lost, but overall, I think a more conservative pick. I think you would go after somebody like Elick, you're thinking, okay, this is guy, like this is almost a safer pick than others, just because I feel like you know what you're going to get in him, and he does have some really, really high skill. And as I mentioned last week, he makes some plays where you perk up. You're like, where did that come from? He made that play, and it's like, wow. So there is some more conversation revolving around Elick. Now let's go to a forward. We have to move on to Ryder Ritchie, another player that was on the U18 Canada team, and a prospect that I think is a real option for Dallas at number 29. If we're talking, I think Brunicke will get there, but I think Ritchie is one of the forwards that has a great chance to still be within arm's reach for Dallas at 29.
Things off, let's talk about the 32nd pick of the draft. The Philadelphia Flyers, with the Florida Panthers selection, select Ryder Ritchie of the Prince Albert Raiders in the WHL. Talk me through his game, what we've seen from him this season, and what are kind of the concerns with him? Because this is exactly where he ended up on our final board, right?
It is indeed. He's a 6 foot, 177 pound right winger who played with the Prince Albert Raiders this season, where he didn't have a bunch of support and he was mainly tasked with being an offensive driver, which is not his game. He's a really skilled complementary piece offensively. He can score goals. He's a really good puck handler. He's a solid enough playmaker as well, but he's at his best when he's not the primary focus on a line. And he's shown very brightly at the U18 World Championships with Team Canada in a bottom six capacity, and he was one of their top point scorers beyond the first line. I think he scored like 4 goals and 8 points in 7 games or something along those lines. Very strong tournament for Ryder Ritchie, and he was able to show what he's able to do when he's afforded the space and the time that playing with players that are at his level and also bring their own fair of strengths to the table. He was really great in that tournament. He's also young for the draft class. He's a player that I think could also really improve his level of play next season. He's going to need some development. He's going to need some time, 3 to 4 years. But you could get a top 6 complementary, high skill offensive piece out of Ryder Ritchie, especially if you're patient with his development.
For sure. I think the main issue for me with Ritchie is the kind of issues with his skating habits. This is a player who often tends to plant his feet in transition, who struggles to kind of stay on his outside edges and use kind of crossovers to get around the ice. He's very much a get the puck, plant your feet, kind of deke around a bit, find an opening take a shot. That needs some work for sure, but I think the Flyers can afford a bit more time. There's no rush really to kind of develop prospects. They've got time to kind of work with Ritchie, kind of improve these areas of his game. I think Ritchie does need a hands-on approach, though. If the Flyers are thinking of having dinner with him once a month and calling it development, he's not going to develop into something really interesting. But the team with a hands-on approach and the right mindset with their prospects could turn Ritchie into a really good second liner. I think there's upside here.
I love the development aspect of someone like Ryder Ritchie. And as they mentioned here, they talk about how Ritchie is going to need 3 or 4 years and how the Flyers don't need to rush. And you could say the same for Dallas if they took somebody like Ryder Ritchie at 29. So I would love this pick. I really enjoyed watching his tape. And as I mentioned at the championships, him playing alongside some really talented players really opened up his game. I think he's a better skater than maybe most give him credit for. I don't think there are a ton of issues with it. And look, players that have struggled with skating have flourished in the National Hockey League but before. And giving him a chance to develop for 2 to 3 years. And Dallas is starting to show that they can do that, especially with forwards. Not so much defensemen in a lot of ways, but they have shown the ability to develop really, really strong top 6 caliber forwards. And as Sebastian mentioned there, Ritchie has high level skill and he could be potentially a top 6 player at some point within his career. So I think that is some great insight on those 3 prospects, including Ritchie. So thank you so much to those 2 over at Locked On NHL Prospects. They're fantastic. Please give them a check out if you want some more in-depth conversation on certain prospects as well. All righty, let's talk about some of the big questions revolving around this NHL draft. And yeah, we'll leave it there before the NHL draft on Friday night. We'll do that in just a moment. So a few big questions here for you on this 2024 NHL draft, which takes place on Friday night. I want to go back to Caden Lidstrom. He was taken 4th overall in the mock draft, and there are some concerns with his health and and I wanted to share some of those for the possibility that he could slide. He still is a top 5 prospect in most experts' eyes, but you never know with medicals and stuff like that. This comes from Wheeler of The Athletic. As I recently reported, the doctor and physio who've been treating Lindstrom have now provided a pair of reports to NHL Central Scouting outlining that they feel Caden will make a full recovery without requiring surgery. Back injuries are tricky, though. Recent stories like Gabriel Velarde's are obviously going to be front of the mind. And he has dealt with some complications during his recovery process. Had he been healthy and continued to play like he had been in the first half, I think he quite likely would have been in my top 5. He might still go there, even if I've slotted him closer to the top 10. That has more to do with the sample size and strength of other prospects in that range, though, too. So there you go. There is some concern with Caden Lindstrom, and maybe that's a possible player that slides outside of the top 10 if teams do have some concerns. And you also have to take into account some teams will just take him off the board if there are concerns with certain health. You look at the NHL or the NFL draft, there are medical red flags, and there are teams that will not take any players with certain medical histories. So it's the same here in the National Hockey League. The age-old question, when's the earliest you would take a goalie? There's there's always been that stigma of you never take a goalie in the first round, and sort of the same stigma you never take a running back in the top 10 or even the first round for that matter. There's always some questions around that. Proneman here for The Athletic says, in the second round, I would consider Leskin's Marcus Jidloff. He's 6'6", moves well in his size. It's smart and had a great statistical year in Sweden. Ideally, I'd like to wait for the end of the second or beginning of the third round, though, to discuss a goalie. Wheeler, on the other hand, says, I believed in all of Troy Augustine, Michael Erbel, Adam Guyon, and Jacob Fowler as second-round candidates in last year's draft. All 4 of those goalies would firmly be my top-ranked goalie in this class, though. As a result, I'm probably not turning my attention to the net until the third round. So there you go. End of the second round to third round for the first goalie taken off the board in this year's 2024 NHL Draft. So there are some of the bigger questions. I answered some of them as well throughout today's episode of Locked On Stars. I want to thank everybody, as always, for the support over the last few weeks. I know the NHL offseason can be a bit of a drag sometimes, but I'm trying to keep it fresh. And the next week or so is going to be a lot of fun. With the draft, of course, we have free agency. Some stuff is starting to pick up. And hey, the Stars have already made one move. Maybe there's some more in the future. So we're going to try to keep it fresh as possible here on Locked On Stars. And yeah, it can be a bit tough sometimes talking about Dallas and the Stars every single day. I don't mean tough as in talking about them, the content wise, and maybe it's a bit redundant, but trying to come up with some ideas and keep it fresh and have some fun as well, and at least be entertaining as possible. So please be sure, like, comment, subscribe. Let's continue to grow this community. We talk about the Stars every single day. Be sure to share it out and let people know we're talking Stars hockey all the time here on Locked On. Enjoy your Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of the week. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm supposed to have Ryan Chambers on, the guest from Starcastic Remarks. We're going to talk some offseason, so be on the lookout for that tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow. So long, Stars fans.